The winds of the Antarctic Peninsula have kept their secrets for over a century, but some mysteries refuse to stay buried beneath the ice. In 1912, renowned polar explorer Captain Edmund Thorne led what would become one of history's most enigmatic expeditions. Thorne was no ordinary adventurer. His reputation preceded him as both a brilliant navigator and a man obsessed with theories that made his peers uncomfortable. He believed Antarctica held evidence of life forms that predated human civilization, creatures that existed in the spaces between what science could explain and what the human eye could perceive. Margaret Whitfield had spent 15 years cataloging artifacts for the Royal Geographical Society when she received an unusual delivery in autumn 2023. A construction crew renovating a Victorian warehouse in London had discovered a sealed chamber behind a false wall containing dozens of wooden crates marked with Captain Edmund Thorne's expedition seal. The chamber was hermetically sealed and lined with materials designed to preserve its contents against moisture and time. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure these artifacts would survive intact until they were discovered. Most crates contained standard polar equipment, but one heavy canvas-wrapped box bore Thorne's personal seal and a handwritten note in his distinctive script. For those who come after, the truth requires witnesses. What we discovered must not be lost to time, though it may be too terrible for immediate understanding. Inside the box, Whitfield found Thorne's personal journals, navigational instruments, detailed maps, and a small tin container sealed with wax. The preservation was remarkable. The dry London climate and sealed chamber had protected the contents so effectively that ink remained unfaded despite the passage of more than a century. The Thorne expedition was meticulously planned, funded by wealthy industrialists, intrigued by the captain's unconventional theories. Unlike other polar expeditions focused on geographical discovery, Thorne's mission was explicitly scientific. He assembled a carefully chosen team of 6 men. Thomas Stevens, the expedition photographer whose technical skills were legendary among polar explorers, Dr. William Morrison, a geologist, Henry Blackwood, a meteorologist, James Crawford, the cartographer, Michael O'Sullivan, their equipment specialist, and Arthur Pemberton, who served as both cook and medical officer. 7 men who vanished without a trace in March of 1912. The expedition disappeared during what should have been a routine supply run approximately 40 miles inland from their last known position. Search parties scoured the peninsula for months, finding nothing but scattered equipment and evidence of hasty evacuation. The official records declared the expedition lost to a sudden blizzard, another tragic footnote in the annals of polar exploration. Dr. James Hartwell, a historian specializing in early 20th century polar expeditions, has studied the Thorne expedition for decades. The search efforts were hampered by unseasonably violent weather that persisted for weeks after the expedition's disappearance. When teams finally reached Thorne's last camp, they found evidence of hasty evacuation, tents left standing but supplies scattered, equipment abandoned in configurations suggesting panic rather than orderly retreat. Most disturbing was the absence of any human remains or clear trail. It was as if 7 men had simply vanished into the polar wind. The journals made for increasingly disturbing reading. Thorne's early entries were methodical, documenting weather patterns and wildlife observations with scientific precision. But as the expedition progressed deeper into uncharted territory, his tone shifted dramatically. The neat, careful script became hurried, sometimes erratic. He wrote of sounds that had no identifiable source, deep, resonant tones that seemed to emerge from the ice itself. He described shadows that moved independently of their casters, always at the periphery of vision, vanishing when observed directly. March 10th brought the first clear signs of trouble. Stevens' report sounds with no identifiable source, deep, resonant tones emerging from the ice itself, shadows that move independently of their casters, always at the periphery of vision. The crew's psychological state began to deteriorate as they encountered phenomena that defied rational explanation. Stevens, normally cheerful and reliable, became withdrawn and photographed empty landscapes obsessively, claiming he could see things through the camera lens that were invisible to naked observation. March 12th showed the situation worsening. Morrison has abandoned his geological surveys. He stares at ice formations for hours, sketching patterns he claims are too regular to be natural. Blackwood's instruments register impossible readings, temperature variations without wind, atmospheric pressure changes that follow no known principles. The men were experienced polar explorers accustomed to isolation and extreme weather, yet something in that uncharted region was affecting them in ways that previous expeditions had never reported. The penultimate entry, dated March 14th, was particularly unsettling. "We are not alone here. Something watches us, follows us, studies us as we have studied the ice. The indigenous guides I consulted before departure spoke of the shadow people, beings that exist in the spaces between light and darkness, visible only under specific conditions. I dismissed their warnings as primitive superstition. God forgive me, I was wrong." Thorne's scientific rationalism was crumbling under the weight of experiences that his training could not explain. The final entry, dated March 15th, 1912, was barely legible. "The storm approaches faster than predicted. Stevens went to secure the cache and has not returned. Found his camera abandoned near the supplies, but the plate inside was exposed. Crawford reports strange lights moving beneath the ice. Not aurora. Something else entirely. Something is wrong here. The shadows move when we are not watching. If we do not survive, may God help whoever finds this record. The truth is worse than I imagined." The sealed tin contained a single photographic glass plate negative, pristine despite its age. The plate showed what appeared to be the expedition's final camp, 3 canvas tents arranged in a protective triangle around supply caches, with the stark Antarctic landscape stretching endlessly beyond. It was, by all appearances, a routine expedition photograph, the kind taken to document progress and camp conditions for official reports. Dr. Sarah Chen, a photographic conservator at the British Museum, was brought in to process the plate using modern digital scanning techniques. The image quality was extraordinarily sharp for field photography of the era, suggesting Stevens had been an exceptionally skilled photographer. More puzzling was the plate's exceptional preservation. Most glass negatives of this age showed some deterioration, but this specimen appeared as if it had been developed yesterday. The initial scan confirmed a well-organized camp, photographed during clear weather, with sharp shadows indicating bright sunlight from a low angle. The technical quality was remarkable. Every detail was captured with crystalline clarity. But as Chen adjusted the digital enhancement parameters to reveal details invisible in standard prints, something unusual emerged at the edge of the frame. There, standing partially obscured behind the leftmost tent, was the unmistakable silhouette of a human figure. At first glance, it appeared to be one of the expedition members, perhaps caught in motion as the photograph was taken. But as Chen refined the image resolution and applied advanced contrast enhancement algorithms, disturbing details became apparent. The figure stood unnaturally erect, almost rigid in posture, with arms hanging straight down at its sides, in a position no human would naturally maintain. It appeared significantly taller than any human should be at that distance from the camera, and its proportions seemed subtly wrong. The torso too elongated, the limbs slightly out of normal human ratio. Its outline was sharp in some places, but strangely indistinct in others, as if it existed in a different focal plane from the rest of the scene. Dr. Hartwell was called in to analyze the image against known expedition records. He compared the mysterious figure to detailed photographs of all 7 men, measuring relative heights and body proportions against the known scale of the camp equipment. The figure matched none of them. Moreover, its apparent height, calculated from its position relative to the tent and supply crates, would have made it nearly 8 feet tall. No member of Thorne's expedition was taller than 6 feet 2 inches, but it was Chen who noticed the detail that transformed curiosity into something approaching dread. Despite the clear, low-angled sunlight that cast long, distinct shadows from every tent, supply crate, and piece of equipment in the photograph, the mysterious figure cast no shadow at all. It stood in the bright Antarctic sun like a void, present but somehow not entirely there. Every other object in the frame cast shadows consistent with the light source angle, but the figure existed as if illuminated by different rules of physics entirely. Hartwell initially proposed rational explanations, a double exposure or processing error in primitive field conditions. Glass plate photography was notoriously sensitive to environmental factors, and technical issues could create seemingly supernatural effects. But Chen's digital analysis ruled out these possibilities systematically. Using photographic forensics techniques, she demonstrated that the figure's light and shadow patterns were perfectly integrated with the rest of the scene. Spectral analysis showed that the figure's image was composed of the same silver halide grain patterns as the rest of the photograph. Whatever had been photographed was actually present when the shutter opened, standing exactly where the image showed. The breakthrough came when Whitfield discovered additional pages from Thorne's journals, tucked between the binding and cover, so carefully that they had initially been overlooked. These fragments contained references to Stevens reporting increasingly disturbing encounters near their supply depot. Stevens claimed to have seen a shadow without a source moving among the cached equipment and always at the periphery of his vision, vanishing when he turned to look directly. Stevens had begun carrying his camera constantly, attempting to photograph these phenomena. His technique became obsessive. He would set up the heavy tripod at the slightest provocation, exposing plate after plate in attempts to capture evidence of what he claimed to be observing. The camera reveals details invisible to naked observation, patterns in ice and shadow that suggest intelligence and purpose behind and seemingly natural formations. Stevens wrote these words in his increasingly erratic handwriting. Elizabeth Thorne, great niece of Captain Edmund Thorne and a respected archaeologist, joined the investigation, bringing family documents that had never been shared with official societies. These letters revealed Thorne's true motivation. He believed the Antarctic ice preserved evidence of non-human intelligence, entities that existed in frequencies of reality just outside normal human perception. His correspondence showed extensive research into indigenous accounts of supernatural encounters, folklore from polar regions, and anthropological studies of shamanic practices designed to perceive non-physical phenomena. One letter to his brother was particularly revealing, describing Thorne's theory that certain geological formations in Antarctica might serve as dimensional windows or portals between different planes of existence. He theorized that the extreme magnetic conditions near the poles, combined with specific atmospheric pressures and temperatures, could create natural phenomena that allowed glimpses into parallel realities. The indigenous peoples of the far north speak of beings that can only be seen through certain rituals or under specific conditions, beings that exist in the spaces between what we consider real and what we dismiss as imagination. They describe entities that cast no shadows, that appear in peripheral vision, that can be captured in reflective surfaces but not observed directly. I believe photographic plates, with their unique sensitivity to light spectrums invisible to the human eye, might capture what our ancestors could only glimpse in altered states of consciousness. The evidence pointed to an unsettling conclusion. The mysterious figure in Stevens's photograph was what Captain Thorne had been searching for all along, proof that humanity was not alone on Earth, and that some forms of consciousness operated by rules entirely different from our own. The figure appeared only on the photographic plate because it existed in wavelengths of light that human eyes could not process, frequencies of reality that required technological mediation to perceive. Modern analysis revealed that the figure's image registered in infrared and ultraviolet spectrums simultaneously, an optical impossibility that suggested it existed across multiple dimensional planes at once. The photograph was no accident. It was evidence, carefully preserved and deliberately hidden, waiting for a time when technology could reveal its full implications. Thomas Stevens, in his final moments, had developed the plate not as casual documentation, but as proof of an encounter that cost him his life. The scratches along the plate's edges, when examined under magnification, formed a pattern that matched symbols found in Thorne's correspondence with indigenous shamans, suggesting Stevens understood the significance of what he had captured. The rigid, unnaturally tall figure standing shadowless among their supplies was something that belonged to Antarctica's ancient past, awakened by their presence and captured forever in silver halide crystals. Captain Thorne's final log entry took on new meaning. The storm that killed his expedition was not merely meteorological. It was a response to their intrusion into territories that had remained undisturbed for millennia. The figure in the photograph stood as both discovery and warning, evidence of a world that existed parallel to our own, but operated by entirely different principles of existence. The glass plate negative now rests in a climate-controlled vault at the Royal Geographical Society. Its digital scans studied by researchers who struggle to classify what they have found. Some maintain it represents an elaborate hoax, though none can explain how such an effect could have been achieved with 1912 technology. Others whisper that it proves humanity shares this planet with forms of consciousness we are not yet equipped to understand. The Antarctic Peninsula continues to guard its secrets beneath sheets of ancient ice, but now we know that some mysteries are not buried. They are waiting, patient and timeless, for the moment when humanity is ready to acknowledge that we have never been alone on this world. The figure in Thomas Stevens's final photograph stands as proof that consciousness takes forms we cannot imagine, existing in spaces between what we can see and what we dare to believe. In the end, Captain Edmund Thorne found exactly what he was searching for. The tragedy is that the discovery cost everything: his life, his crew, and perhaps humanity's innocence about our place in the cosmic order. The shadowless figure remains frozen in that final moment, a testament to the price of knowledge and a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed.